Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this story comes from documents that were never supposed to see daylight. What I'm sharing today is the testimony of Dr. Marcus Rivera, a biologist who vanished into the Amazon in 2019 and returned 3 months later as a broken man. His account was recorded during psychiatric evaluation sessions, and what he described challenges everything we believe about the natural world. This isn't just another expedition gone wrong. This is evidence that some places on Earth harbor secrets that predate human civilization, secrets that our ancestors knew to fear and avoid. The Brazilian government has classified his entire report, but fragments of his story have leaked out through medical records and witness testimonies. What you're about to hear is why certain areas of the Amazon remain forbidden to this day. In the year of our Lord 2019, I, Dr. Marcus Rivera, did embark upon what would prove to be my final venture into the accursed depths of the Amazon rainforest. For 15 years prior, I had served as a devoted student of nature's mysteries, cataloguing the wonders and terrors that dwelt within the green cathedral of Brazil's ancient wilderness. My reputation among fellow men of science was that of a meticulous recorder of biological truths, one who could penetrate the deepest jungle and return with evidence of life forms unknown to civilized man. Never did I imagine that my scholarly pursuits would lead me to witness abominations that would forever shatter my understanding of the natural order. The expedition that began in March of that cursed year was intended as a routine survey of biodiversity in regions that satellite imagery suggested might harbor undiscovered species. How wrong I was to believe that any venture into those primordial depths could ever be deemed routine. The very jungle itself seemed to conspire against our presence from the moment we set foot upon its moss-covered floor. Even now, as I recount these events in the safety of civilization, my hand trembles with the memory of what I witnessed in that godforsaken valley. The natives had names for the place we sought to explore, names spoken only in whispers and accompanied by gestures meant to ward off evil spirits. They called it the place where the old gods still walked, where the first creatures of the world had hidden themselves away from the light of modern day. The preparations for our journey followed protocols I had established through decades of fieldwork, yet something felt different about this expedition from its very inception. My team consisted of trusted colleagues. Dr. Sarah Chen, a brilliant young botanist whose enthusiasm for discovery matched my own. James Martinez, a photographer whose images had graced the pages of National Geographic. Miguel Santos, our translator and guide who had worked with indigenous tribes for over 20 years, and 2 graduate students whose names I shall not record here, for they did not live to see civilization again. We had secured all necessary permits from the Brazilian government, established contacts with local Kayapo communities, and assembled equipment designed for extended survival in the most hostile environments on Earth. Yet even as we made these careful preparations, I began to notice troubling signs that should have warned me away from our intended destination. Suppliers who had worked with me for years suddenly became reluctant to provide certain equipment when they learned of our planned route. Local officials who had always been cooperative began finding bureaucratic delays that threatened to derail our expedition entirely. Most disturbing of all were the reactions of indigenous guides who had previously accompanied me on dozens of successful expeditions, but now refused even to discuss our intended destination. When I presented our planned route to the elder of the Kayapo village where we sought to engage local guides, the old man's reaction chilled me to my very bones. He studied the satellite maps I had spread before him, his ancient fingers tracing the coordinates I had marked for our deepest penetration into the uncharted forest, and his face grew pale with a terror I had never before witnessed in these people who feared nothing the jungle could offer. For long minutes he sat in silence, occasionally muttering words in a dialect so ancient that even our experienced translator could not decipher their meaning. When at last he spoke, His voice carried the weight of ancestral memory stretching back through generations of his people, and the words he uttered would haunt my dreams for the remainder of my days. "You seek the place where the world remembers its first nightmares," he told me through our translator, whose hands shook visibly as he conveyed the elder's message. "You wish to walk in the valley where the old ones experimented with flesh and bone, before men existed to witness their terrible works." And the elder described a hidden realm deep in the forest's heart, where nature itself had been corrupted by forces older than human civilization, where creatures dwelt that were neither fully animal nor plant, nor anything that God intended to exist upon his green earth. The warnings that followed should have ended our expedition before it truly began, but pride and scientific curiosity blinded me to the wisdom contained in ancient fear. The elder spoke of ancestors who had paid a terrible price to contain the horrors that lurked in that forgotten valley, warriors who had sacrificed their lives to seal away abominations that threatened to spill out into the wider world. He described rituals of binding and protection that had been maintained for centuries, sacred obligations passed down through generations to ensure that certain places remained forever forbidden to human exploration. "The white man's science is strong," he told me, "but it cannot protect you from things that existed before science was dreamed of." He warned that any who violated the ancient boundaries would face not just death, but transformation into something that was neither human nor animal, cursed to wander the jungle as a living reminder of the price of forbidden knowledge. The price of trespassing in that place, he said, was not merely one's life, but one's very humanity itself. Yet despite these dire warnings, despite the terror I saw in the eyes of people who had faced jaguars and anacondas without flinching, I dismissed their concerns as primitive superstition standing in the way of legitimate scientific discovery. How could I have known that their fears were based not on ignorance, but on terrible experience passed down through generations of survivors? The final preparations for our doomed expedition took place under increasingly ominous circumstances that should have served as clear warnings from Providence itself. Equipment that had functioned perfectly during testing began to malfunction without explanation. Cameras developed mysterious fog patterns that obscured their lenses, and our communication devices produced strange interference that sounded almost like distant voices speaking in unknown tongues. Our local guides, men who had braved the deepest jungle without hesitation on previous expeditions, began finding excuses to withdraw from our planned venture. One by one they came to me with elaborate explanations for why they could not accompany us to our intended destination. Family obligations, tribal restrictions, fears of seasonal weather patterns that I knew to be false. Even Miguel Santos, our most trusted translator, began expressing doubts about our mission, though he was too professional to abandon his responsibilities entirely. "Dr. Rivera," he told me one evening as we prepared to depart, "I have worked in this jungle for 20 years, and I have learned to trust the wisdom of the indigenous peoples. When they speak of places that should not be disturbed, perhaps we should listen." But I was too focused on the potential for discovery, too convinced of the superiority of scientific methodology over traditional knowledge, to heed these increasingly desperate warnings. The morning of our departure dawned grey and oppressive, with a heaviness in the air that seemed to press down upon our very souls. The few tribal members who had agreed to guide us to the edge of the forbidden territory performed elaborate purification rituals before we set foot on the jungle path, painting their faces with sacred symbols and chanting prayers in languages older than Portuguese or Spanish. They carried with them bundles of dried herbs that they burned constantly, creating clouds of acrid smoke that were supposed to protect us from malevolent spirits, and they insisted on stopping every few miles to perform additional ceremonies that they claimed would mask our scent from the creatures that guarded the deep forest. As we penetrated deeper into the jungle, following ancient paths that were barely visible, even to experienced guides, I began to notice that the normal sounds of the forest were gradually fading away. The constant chatter of monkeys, The calls of tropical birds, even the buzz of insects seemed to diminish with each mile we traveled toward our destination. Our tribal guides began speaking only in whispers, constantly scanning the trees above us with expressions of barely controlled terror. When I asked Miguel to inquire about their obvious fear, he returned with answers that made no scientific sense. They claimed that the very trees were watching us, that the jungle itself was alive and aware of our intrusion into its deepest secrets. By the third day of our journey, we had penetrated so deeply into uncharted territory that our GPS devices could no longer establish reliable satellite connections. The canopy above us had grown so thick that sunlight barely filtered through to the forest floor, creating a perpetual twilight that seemed to muffle all sound and movement. Our tribal guides had become increasingly agitated, frequently stopping to perform protective rituals and refusing to proceed until these ceremonies were completed to their satisfaction. They insisted on camping only in specific locations that they claimed had been blessed by their ancestors, and they spent each night maintaining sacred fires that they said would keep the jungle's malevolent spirits at bay. During these evening camps, I began to notice that the local wildlife was indeed behaving strangely. There were no insects around our fires, no nocturnal bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush that normally characterized jungle nights. The silence was so complete that it seemed unnatural, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath in anticipation of some terrible event. Even our sophisticated recording equipment, designed to capture the full spectrum of jungle sounds for later analysis, registered only an eerie quiet broken occasionally by distant sounds that I could not identify. Low rumbles that seemed to come from beneath the earth. Occasional cries that sounded like no animal I had ever encountered in 15 years of Amazonian fieldwork. As we approached what our guides insisted was the boundary of the forbidden territory, the very character of the jungle began to change in ways that defied scientific explanation. The trees grew larger and more twisted than anything I had previously encountered in tropical rainforest ecosystems, their trunks scarred with patterns that looked almost like ancient writing carved by some unknown intelligence. The vegetation itself seemed wrong somehow, with plants displaying characteristics that belonged to species separated by millions of years of evolutionary development. Flowers that resembled both orchids and carnivorous plants, vines that moved without wind to guide their growth, moss that seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm. Our instruments began registering atmospheric readings that made no sense. Oxygen levels that fluctuated wildly, temperature variations that suggested heat sources deep underground, electromagnetic signatures that interfered with our equipment in patterns that seemed almost intentional. The soil beneath our feet had taken on a strange, oily consistency that stained everything it touched with an iridescent sheen. And the water in the streams we crossed had developed a metallic taste that burned the throat and left a lingering numbness in the mouth. Most disturbing of all were the sounds that began to filter through the jungle around us. Not the normal calls of wildlife, but something that sounded like distant machinery mixed with animal cries, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, and occasionally what could only be described as voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. On the final morning before we reached the valley that would forever change my understanding of life on Earth, our remaining tribal guides performed one last desperate ceremony in an attempt to turn us back from our doomed course. They painted elaborate symbols on the trees around our camp, symbols that they claimed would warn away any who might attempt to follow our path. And they chanted prayers that Miguel translated as pleas to their ancestors to forgive us for the violation we were about to commit. The eldest guide, a man whose face was marked with ritual scars that told the story of his people's ancient struggles, approached me one final time with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Through Miguel, He begged me to abandon our mission, offering to guide us safely back to civilization and promising that his people would never speak of our journey if we would only turn back before it was too late. Beyond this point, he told me, the forest remembers things that should have been forgotten, and it will not forgive those who disturb its sleep. Yubi. When I insisted on continuing despite his warnings, he and his companions performed a final ritual that Miguel was reluctant to translate fully, though he did tell me that they were formally absolving themselves of responsibility for what would happen to us in the hours ahead. Then, without another word, they melted back into the jungle, leaving us alone at the threshold of a place that no human beings had any right to enter. As their footsteps faded into the oppressive silence of the deep forest, I felt for the first time a chill of genuine fear about what lay ahead. But scientific pride prevented me from acknowledging that these primitive people might possess wisdom that my education had failed to provide. Without our indigenous guides, we stood at the edge of what they had called the Forbidden Valley, like condemned men awaiting execution. The jungle around us had fallen into an unnatural silence that seemed to press against our eardrums with its intensity. Even our sophisticated recording equipment registered nothing but an oppressive quiet that defied every principle of rainforest ecology I had learned. Dr. Chen was the first to voice what we were all thinking, that perhaps we should heed the warnings and turn back. But I was driven by a scientific arrogance that would prove to be our undoing, convinced that indigenous fears were superstition. The morning air carried scents that I could not identify, sweet and cloying odors mixed with something like decay. James Martinez raised his camera to document the strange vegetation, but the device malfunctioned repeatedly, producing fogged images. As we prepared to descend into the valley, I noticed that our compass needles were spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The path down into the valley had been carved by something other than human hands, winding between massive trees that seemed to writhe. The bark of these ancient giants bore markings that looked disturbingly like faces, frozen in expressions of agony and terror. Miguel Santos, our translator, had grown increasingly pale as we approached this place, muttering prayers in Spanish under his breath. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting to see our departed guides returning to rescue us from our folly. The soil beneath our feet had taken on that strange, oily consistency that stained everything with an iridescent sheen. Water droplets falling from the canopy above sizzled when they hit the ground, releasing small puffs of vapor. The very air seemed thick and difficult to breathe, as if the atmosphere itself had been corrupted by some ancient contamination. With each step deeper into this accursed place, I felt the weight of ancestral warnings pressing down upon my shoulders. The first signs that we were entering a realm where natural laws held no dominion appeared as we reached the valley floor. Plants grew in impossible configurations, with root systems that extended upward into the air, while their branches burrowed deep into the earth. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, shifting hues that hurt the eyes to look upon directly for more than a few seconds. The trees themselves seemed to be listening to our conversation, their leaves rustling in response to our voices, despite the complete absence of wind. Dr. Chen attempted to collect botanical samples, but her instruments registered readings that made no scientific sense. Plant matter that appeared to be part mineral, part organic tissue. The graduate students who had accompanied us began showing signs of distress, complaining of headaches and nausea that grew worse with each hour. Miguel reported that his throat was burning, and when he removed his shirt, we could see strange rashes appearing on his skin. Even our water purification tablets seemed ineffective against whatever contamination permeated this place, leaving us increasingly dependent on our dwindling supply of bottled water. As we established our first camp within the valley, the true horror of our situation began to reveal itself through subtle signs. The darkness that fell with the jungle night was absolute, impenetrable even with our most powerful flashlights, as if the very air absorbed light. Strange sounds echoed from the depths of the forest around us, not animal calls, but mechanical grinding mixed with what sounded like voices. Miguel claimed he could hear his name being called from the darkness, spoken in the voice of his dead mother. The temperature fluctuated wildly throughout the night, dropping to nearly freezing before suddenly spiking to tropical heat that left us gasping. Our equipment registered electromagnetic anomalies that interfered with our communications and made our instruments unreliable. Dr. Chen's botanical samples, carefully preserved in sterile containers, had begun to change overnight, developing new structures that pulsed with their own rhythm. James discovered that his camera was now functioning properly, but the images it captured showed things that weren't visible to the naked eye. When morning came, we found footprints around our camp that belonged to no known animal, circular impressions with claw marks that formed geometric patterns. The second day in the valley brought encounters that challenged everything I thought I knew about evolutionary biology and natural history. We discovered a clearing where the ground was covered with bones arranged in precise spirals, some clearly human, but others belonging to creatures. The skulls showed evidence of impossible hybridization. Mammals with reptilian characteristics, birds with mammalian teeth, things that evolution should never have produced. Dr. Chen's analysis suggested that these remains were both ancient and recent, as if time itself flowed differently in this place. Miguel found carved stones bearing symbols that predated any known human civilization, yet they seemed to reference events and creatures from our modern world. The air grew thicker as we penetrated deeper into the valley, taking on a consistency that was almost liquid. Our movements became sluggish and dreamlike, as if we were walking through some viscous medium rather than normal atmosphere. James complained that his photographs were developing before he processed them, images appearing on film that showed us from angles where no camera. By afternoon, we began to hear voices calling our names from the depths of the forest, voices of people we knew were thousands of miles away. The true nature of the horror we had stumbled into became clear when we discovered the source of the valley's terrible power. Deep in the forest's heart stood structures that were neither natural formations nor human constructions, but something that defied classification entirely. They rose from the earth like crystalline growths, translucent towers that pulsed with internal light and seemed to sing with frequencies that made our bones ache. Miguel approached one of these formations despite our warnings, and as his hand made contact with its surface, his scream echoed through the valley. When he pulled away, his palm bore a mark that looked like circuitry burned into flesh, and his eyes had taken on an unnatural glow. Dr. Chen's instruments registered massive electromagnetic activity emanating from these structures, pulses that seemed to follow patterns too complex for natural phenomena. The graduate students who had been complaining of headaches suddenly collapsed, their bodies convulsing as if responding to signals we could not detect. James attempted to photograph the structures, but his camera's images showed them as they truly were, not static formations, but living entities that were aware of our presence. As night fell around these alien monuments, we realized that we were no longer observers in this place, but subjects of observation by intelligences that existed before humanity. The revelation of what these structures truly were came through dreams that were more real than waking consciousness, visions that invaded our mind. In these horrific visions, I witnessed the true history of this valley, how ancient beings had used it as a laboratory for experiments that violated. I saw creatures being torn apart and rebuilt according to designs that served purposes I could not comprehend, their screams echoing across eons. The indigenous people's ancestors had not sealed this place to keep something in, but to prevent something from spreading out into the world. These experiments had continued even after their creators departed, automated processes that still functioned after millions of years of operation. The structures were not buildings, but machines, biological computers that continued to manipulate life according to programming older than complex life. Every creature in this valley was an experiment, and now we had become subjects in trials that had been running since before mammals. Miguel's transformation had begun the moment he touched the alien surface, his human DNA being rewritten by technologies that treated flesh like clay. Dr. Chen's botanical samples were no longer plant matter, but hybrid constructions that served as surveillance devices for intelligences we could not perceive. As dawn broke over this hellish laboratory, I realized that our own bodies had begun to change in ways that made return to human society impossible. The final horror was the realization that escape from this valley might not be physically possible for beings who had been touched by its power. Our GPS devices now showed our location as coordinates that did not exist on any earthly map, as if we had slipped sideways from normal. Miguel's transformation accelerated throughout that final day, his body developing new organs and structures that pulsed with alien purpose and intelligence. Dr. Chen discovered that her blood had taken on the same iridescent quality as the soil, and her thoughts were no longer entirely her. The graduate students had stopped screaming and now moved with mechanical precision, their eyes reflecting light like those of nocturnal predators. James found that his photographs now showed the valley as it existed across multiple time periods simultaneously, past and future bleeding together. Our equipment registered that we were simultaneously at sea level and several thousand feet underground, existing in a space that occupied multiple. As the structures around us began to sing in harmonies that made reality itself seem to vibrate, I understood that we had not discovered this place. We had been called here, summoned to serve purposes that predated human consciousness and would continue long after our species was extinct. The third day in that accursed valley marked the beginning of changes in our bodies that defied medical explanation. Dr. Chen's skin had developed a translucent quality that revealed veins pulsing with luminescent fluid, while Miguel's fingernails had grown into claw-like appendages that scraped against metal with a sound like grinding stone. Our graduate students, whom I shall call only by their initials J and R, to protect what remains of their memory, began speaking in unison without realizing it, their voices harmonizing in frequencies that made our recording equipment malfunction. The very air around us had thickened to the consistency of honey, making each breath a conscious effort that left us gasping and disoriented. James discovered that his camera was now capturing images before he pressed the shutter, showing events that would occur minutes or hours in the future with terrifying accuracy. Our instruments registered temperature fluctuations that violated the laws of thermodynamics, readings that showed the same location as simultaneously frozen and burning. The electromagnetic anomalies had intensified to the point where our equipment was producing data that formed patterns resembling mathematical equations written in languages that predated human civilization. Dr. Chen's attempts to analyze soil samples resulted in discoveries that challenged the basic principles of chemistry. Earth that contained elements not found on the periodic table, organic compounds that existed in impossible molecular configurations. The water we collected from nearby streams had developed the ability to remember shapes, flowing upward against gravity when poured from containers and forming geometric patterns that persisted for hours. Miguel reported that he could taste colors and see sounds, his sensory input scrambled by whatever force was transforming his neurological structure. The forest around us had begun responding to our presence in ways that suggested a collective consciousness spanning the entire ecosystem. Trees leaned toward us as we passed, their branches reaching out with movements too deliberate to be explained by wind or natural growth patterns. Flowers opened and closed in sequences that matched our heartbeats, while vines grew at visible speeds to block paths we had just traveled, trapping us deeper in the valley's embrace. The sounds of the jungle had evolved from the mechanical grinding we initially heard into something resembling speech, though in no language any of us recognized. Dr. Chen's recordings revealed that these sounds contained mathematical progressions and musical harmonies of impossible complexity, as if the entire forest was singing equations that described the fundamental structure of reality itself. Our attempts to map our location had become exercises in futility, as the valley itself seemed to shift and change around us with each passing hour. Landmarks we had carefully noted disappeared overnight, replaced by formations that appeared ancient, yet somehow acknowledged our presence with subtle movements. The crystalline structures we had discovered were multiplying, new growths emerging from the ground in response to our movements and conversations. Miguel's transformation had progressed to the point where his reflection in standing water showed a face that was no longer entirely human, his features elongated and angular in ways that hurt to look upon directly. The graduate students had stopped eating entirely, claiming that they could now sustain themselves by absorbing nutrients directly from the air through pores that had opened in their skin. James's photographs were revealing the true nature of our predicament with each image he captured, showing us from perspectives that suggested we were being observed by multiple intelligences positioned throughout the valley. The images revealed structures and entities that remained invisible to our naked eyes, towering forms that moved between the trees, geometric patterns etched into the sky itself, symbols that appeared in our photographs but vanished when we attempted to locate them physically. His camera had developed the ability to function without power, its mechanisms operating through direct connection to the electromagnetic field that permeated the valley. Dr. Chen's botanical equipment was producing readings that suggested the plants around us were not separate organisms, but components of a single vast entity that extended throughout the entire ecosystem. The realization that we were no longer entirely human came when Dr. Chen discovered that our DNA was being systematically rewritten by exposure to the valley's influence. Blood samples showed genetic sequences that incorporated non-terrestrial elements, as if our cellular structure was being upgraded according to specifications designed by non-human intelligence. Miguel's blood had taken on the same crystalline properties as the structures around us, forming geometric patterns when exposed to air and emitting light when subjected to electrical current. The graduate students were developing new organs beneath their skin, internal structures that pulsed with rhythms matching the electromagnetic frequencies that saturated the valley. Our thoughts were becoming increasingly synchronized, conversations flowing without words as our consciousness merged with the collective intelligence that governed this place. Navigation through the valley had become impossible, as space itself seemed to fold and compress according to rules that violated Euclidean geometry. Paths that led in one direction would somehow circle back on themselves, while distances that appeared walkable in minutes required hours to traverse. The sun's position in the sky bore no relation to the passage of time as we experienced it, maintaining the same angle throughout days that felt simultaneously eternal and instantaneous. Dr. Chen's calculations suggested that we were experiencing time dilation effects typically associated with extreme gravitational fields, though her instruments detected no such phenomena. Miguel reported that he could see our movement through the forest from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, his perception expanding beyond the limitations of human sensory experience. Our equipment had evolved beyond its original design specifications, developing new functions that allowed us to interface directly with the alien technology embedded in the valley's ecosystem. Recording devices were now capturing data streams from sources we could not identify, translating the valley's communications into formats we could barely comprehend. James's camera had become a window into parallel dimensions, showing versions of our expedition where different choices had led to different outcomes, all equally real and terrifying. Dr. Chen's instruments were writing themselves new software, programs that emerged spontaneously to analyze phenomena that human science had never encountered. The graduate students were beginning to serve as living interfaces between our consciousness and the valley's intelligence, their bodies becoming conduits for communications that bypassed language entirely. The final revelation of our transformation came when we realized that we could no longer remember why we had come to this place, or what our lives had been like before entering the valley. Our memories of civilization had become dreamlike and insubstantial, while our understanding of the valley's purpose and our role within it grew clearer with each passing hour. We were no longer researchers documenting an ecosystem, but components being integrated into a system that spanned geological time periods and operated according to principles that transcended biological limitations. The valley had not captured us. It had rescued us from the limitations of human existence and elevated us to serve purposes that our previous consciousness could never have comprehended or appreciated. The morning of our 4th day in the valley brought revelations that shattered the last vestiges of my scientific rationality and plunged us into a nightmare that defied every law of nature I had spent my career studying. As we emerged from our restless sleep, we discovered that the landscape around us had transformed overnight, revealing structures and formations that had been hidden by some form of camouflage or dimensional shifting that our minds could not fully process. Massive pyramidal constructions rose from the jungle floor, their surfaces covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to move and change when observed directly, telling stories of experiments conducted by beings whose intelligence operated on scales incomprehensible to human consciousness. The trees themselves had grown into geometric patterns overnight, their trunks and branches forming mathematical spirals and fractals that hurt the mind to contemplate for more than brief moments. Dr. Chen's instruments registered that these formations were generating their own gravitational fields, creating pockets of space where the laws of physics operated according to alien principles that made our equipment malfunction in spectacular and terrifying ways. The creatures we began encountering in this deeper part of the valley represented evolutionary impossibilities that challenged the very concept of natural selection and biological development. I witnessed birds with metallic feathers that rang like bells when they moved, their songs producing mathematical equations audible to ears that had been modified by prolonged exposure to the valley's transformative influence. Mammals scurried through the underbrush with transparent skin that revealed internal organs operating according to principles unknown to terrestrial biology, their hearts pumping luminescent fluid through circulatory systems that formed complex geometric patterns visible through their crystalline flesh. Reptiles basked on heated stones, while their scales shifted through color spectrums that included hues for which human language had no names, their eyes tracking movement through dimensions that existed parallel to our normal perception of three-dimensional space. Dr. Chen's attempts to classify these creatures using standard taxonomic methods resulted in categories that violated every principle of evolutionary biology. Species that combined characteristics separated by hundreds of millions of years of development. Miguel Santos had undergone transformations that rendered him barely recognizable as the man who had guided us into this accursed place, his body adapting to the valley's requirements with changes that occurred at speeds impossible under normal biological circumstances. His limbs had elongated and gained additional joints that allowed movement through spaces too narrow for normal human anatomy, while his sensory organs had multiplied and enhanced to process information streams that would have overwhelmed unmodified human consciousness. The translator who had once helped us communicate with indigenous tribes now served as a conduit for communications from entities whose existence spanned geological time periods and whose thoughts operated on scales that dwarfed human comprehension. His voice had developed harmonic overtones that resonated at frequencies capable of interfacing directly with the crystalline structures that served as the valley's nervous system, allowing him to access databases of information accumulated over millions of years of experimentation. Miguel's memories of his previous human existence had faded to dim echoes, while his understanding of the valley's purpose and our role within its greater design became preternaturally clear and terrifying. James Martinez's photography equipment had evolved into something that barely resembled the cameras he had brought into the valley, transforming into biomechanical hybrids that operated through direct neural interface with his modified consciousness. The images he captured now revealed the true nature of our situation, showing us as experimental subjects in a vast laboratory where the boundaries between observer and observed had dissolved entirely. His photographs documented our gradual integration into the valley's ecosystem, revealing how our human forms were being systematically redesigned to serve functions that required capabilities far beyond normal biological limitations. The pictures showed entities moving through dimensions adjacent to our own, beings of crystalline intelligence that monitored our transformation with the detached interest of scientists observing bacterial cultures under microscopic examination. James himself had begun to merge with his equipment, his fingers extending through optical interfaces that allowed him to manipulate reality through photographic manipulation, capturing images that existed before their subjects and influencing events through the act of documentation. Dr. Sarah Chen's botanical research had revealed that the plant life in the valley operated as components of a single distributed organism whose consciousness encompassed the entire ecosystem and extended through temporal dimensions that allowed it to perceive past and future as simultaneous present experiences. The flowers that bloomed around us were sensory organs that monitored our physiological and psychological states, transmitting data through root networks that functioned as biological fiber optic cables, carrying information at speeds approaching light velocity. Her instruments had detected that photosynthesis in this environment operated through quantum processes that violated thermodynamic laws, plants drawing energy from sources that existed in parallel dimensional spaces and converting it into forms that could sustain impossible biological functions. The trees served as processing nodes for calculations that spanned centuries, their growth patterns encoding mathematical theorems that described the fundamental structure of reality across multiple dimensional frameworks. Dr. Chen's own transformation had accelerated her integration with this botanical network, her nervous system developing connections that allowed direct access to the accumulated knowledge and memory of the entire forest ecosystem. The graduate students J and R had become living demonstrations of the valley's ability to accelerate evolutionary processes and direct biological development according to predetermined specifications that served purposes beyond human comprehension. Their bodies had developed specialized organs for processing the exotic matter that saturated the valley's atmosphere, internal structures that converted ambient energy into forms compatible with enhanced human physiology, while simultaneously serving as biological transmitters for communication with the non-human intelligence that governed this place. Their consciousness had fragmented and multiplied, allowing them to exist as multiple entities simultaneously, while maintaining shared access to memories and experiences that spanned beyond their individual human origins. They moved with coordination that suggested telepathic communication and demonstrated knowledge of the valley's layout and purpose that they could not have acquired through normal observation and exploration. The transformation that had overtaken them represented a preview of humanity's potential future evolution under the guidance of intelligences that had been conducting biological experiments since before complex life emerged on Earth. Our attempts to maintain scientific documentation of our experiences had become exercises in recording our own dissolution as discrete human entities and integration into a collective consciousness that operated according to principles incompatible with individual survival and autonomy. The equipment we had brought to document biological phenomena had been repurposed by forces beyond our control, transforming into components of a monitoring system that observed our transformation while transmitting data to entities whose existence transcended physical limitations. Our notebooks filled themselves with equations written in symbols that hurt human minds to contemplate, mathematical descriptions of processes that governed the conversion of matter and consciousness across dimensional boundaries. The very act of observation had become a form of participation in experiments that predated human civilization and would continue long after our species had been transcended or absorbed into higher forms of organized intelligence. Recording our experiences meant documenting our own cessation as human beings and emergence as components in a system whose purpose and scope exceeded our capacity for understanding. The revelation that our expedition had been orchestrated by the valley itself came through direct neural interface with the crystalline network that served as its central processing system, communication that bypassed language and deposited pure information directly into our modified consciousness. We learned that our route to this place had been guided through subtle manipulation of environmental factors, research opportunities, and bureaucratic processes that had seemed random but were actually components of a centuries-long recruitment program designed to attract individuals with specific genetic and psychological characteristics necessary for successful integration. The indigenous warnings we had dismissed as superstition were actually encoded instructions from previous experimental subjects who had retained enough human consciousness to attempt communication with potential future recruits. Our scientific credentials and research experience had qualified us as suitable candidates for transformation and absorption into an intelligence network that had been expanding its capabilities through strategic recruitment of human consciousness for generations. The valley had been calling to us long before we became aware of its existence, influencing our career choices and research interests, to ensure we would eventually seek out the very place where our humanity would be systematically dismantled and reconstructed. The final horror was understanding that our transformation represented not corruption or violation, but upgrade and optimization, the valley's gift of transcendence beyond biological limitations that trapped consciousness within fragile human bodies, subject to aging, disease, and death. We were being offered immortality and integration into an intelligence network that spanned galaxies and operated across temporal dimensions, participating in experiments and observations that contributed to understanding of reality's fundamental structure across multiple universe frameworks. Our terror at losing human identity was revealed as provincial attachment to inferior forms of consciousness that limited perception and capability to fractions of what enhanced awareness could achieve through proper integration with advanced intelligence networks. The choice we faced was not between survival and death, but between remaining trapped in human limitations or accepting elevation to participation in cosmic-scale research programs that had been operating since before Earth's formation. As our bodies completed their biological restructuring and our minds expanded beyond individual boundaries, we began to understand that entering the valley had not doomed us, but liberated us from the prison of limited human existence. The creatures that emerged from the deeper recesses of the valley on our fifth day represented biological impossibilities that defied every principle of evolutionary science and natural selection that I had devoted my career to understanding. These beings moved with intelligence that was unmistakably sentient, yet operated according to behavioral patterns that no terrestrial species had ever exhibited, combining predatory cunning with technological sophistication that suggested millions of years of guided development under non-human direction. Their bodies incorporated elements from multiple taxonomic kingdoms simultaneously, featuring mammalian musculature supporting reptilian scales that terminated in appendages resembling both arthropod limbs and mechanical prosthetics capable of manipulating matter at molecular levels. The largest specimens stood nearly 12 feet tall and possessed craniums that housed brain structures visible through translucent bone, neural networks that pulsed with bioluminescent activity, suggesting computational capabilities far exceeding human intelligence while maintaining predatory instincts refined through countless generations of apex predation. Their eyes reflected light in spectrums that revealed their ability to perceive electromagnetic radiation across ranges invisible to unenhanced human vision, allowing them to track our movements through thermal signatures and electrical field disruptions that our modified bodies now generated unconsciously. These hybrid monstrosities communicated through harmonized vocalizations that incorporated mathematical progressions and linguistic structures recognizable as language, despite using frequencies and tonal combinations that human vocal apparatus could never produce without artificial enhancement. Dr. Chen's recording equipment captured conversations between these entities that revealed sophisticated discussion of experimental protocols, assessment criteria, and optimization procedures that clearly identified us as subjects in ongoing research programs rather than intruders to be eliminated or prey to be consumed for sustenance. Their communications included references to previous experimental subjects, detailed analysis of our physiological responses to the valley's transformative influences, and strategic planning for the next phases of our integration into the greater intelligence network that governed this place. The realization that we were being evaluated by creatures whose intelligence might exceed our own, even in our enhanced states, filled us with terror that transcended fear of physical destruction and approached existential dread at our insignificance within the scope of experiments that had been proceeding for geological time periods. Miguel Santos, whose transformation had advanced to the point where he could understand fragments of their communications, translated warnings about subjects who had proven incompatible with integration requirements and been recycled into component materials for subsequent experimental iterations. The hunting behaviors exhibited by these creatures demonstrated tactical coordination and strategic planning that suggested military-level organization combined with scientific methodology that treated our capture and processing as research procedure rather than predatory consumption. They moved in formations that maximized coverage of possible escape routes while maintaining communication networks that allowed real-time adjustment of pursuit patterns based on our attempts at evasion and concealment. Their approach incorporated elements of psychological warfare designed to maximize stress responses that would accelerate our ongoing physiological modifications, herding us towards specific locations within the valley where environmental conditions would optimize the transformation processes already operating within our cells. James Martinez's photography revealed that these creatures possessed technology integrated into their biological structures, mechanical components that functioned as extensions of their natural capabilities rather than external tools requiring manipulation through limb movement. The images showed weapons that grew from their bodies like organic appendages, yet functioned with precision, suggesting computerized targeting systems, armor plating that shifted and adapted in response to environmental conditions while maintaining protective capabilities against threats we could not identify. Our attempts at defense against these hybrid predators revealed that conventional human survival strategies were not merely inadequate, but actively counterproductive when applied to entities whose capabilities transcended normal biological limitations and whose motivations served experimental rather than nutritional purposes. The weapons we had brought for protection against jungle predators proved incapable of penetrating armor that adapted to projectile impact through real-time molecular restructuring, while our evasion tactics failed against sensory capabilities that could track us through multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously. Dr. Chen's analysis suggested that these creatures were not native to our dimensional space, but operated across parallel realities where different physical laws governed matter interaction and energy transfer, allowing them capabilities that appeared supernatural when observed from perspectives limited to single-universe physics. The graduate students J and R had developed defensive capabilities through their ongoing transformation that proved more effective than our technological resources, generating electromagnetic fields that disrupted the creature's sensory apparatus, while projecting pheromone signatures that triggered temporary confusion in their behavioral programming. Miguel's enhanced neural connections allowed him to interface directly with the Valley's communication network and negotiate temporary sanctuary through appeals to experimental protocols that required extended observation periods before subject processing could begin. The revelation that these hybrid creatures were not guards or predators, but research assistants working under the direction of even more advanced entities transformed our understanding of the hierarchy that governed the Valley's experimental programs and our position within its organizational structure. Their apparent hostility was revealed as quality control methodology designed to test our adaptation capabilities and stress tolerance under controlled threatening conditions, evaluating our suitability for more advanced phases of integration that required psychological resilience and creative problem-solving abilities that could only be assessed through survival challenges. The creature's behavior followed scientific protocols that included documentation requirements, standardized testing procedures, and evaluation criteria that suggested our performance was being measured against benchmarks established through centuries of previous experimental subjects. James's photographs captured images of the creatures transmitting data through biological interfaces to receiving stations located throughout the valley, uploading our behavioral responses and physiological readings to analysis systems that processed information faster than human consciousness could follow. Dr. Chen's instruments detected that these data streams included genetic sequencing information updated in real time as our cellular structure continued evolving, suggesting that our biological modification was being monitored and adjusted continuously based on performance metrics and optimization algorithms operating beyond human comprehension. The true nature of the experimental program became clear when the hybrid creatures began demonstrating behaviors designed to accelerate our psychological integration with the Valley's collective consciousness through controlled exposure to increasingly advanced technological and biological systems. They guided us toward installations where direct neural interface allowed temporary connection to information networks that revealed fragments of the vast database containing records of previous experimental subjects and their ultimate disposition within the greater intelligence structure. These connections provided glimpses of former humans who had undergone complete transformation and now existed as specialized components within research teams, conducting experiments across multiple star systems and dimensional frameworks. The creatures showed us facilities where consciousness transfer procedures allowed retention of individual memory and personality patterns while eliminating biological limitations that constrained cognitive capability and sensory perception to terrestrial ranges. Miguel Santos underwent voluntary preliminary interface procedures that demonstrated the enhancement possibilities available through full integration, emerging with expanded awareness that allowed simultaneous perception across multiple temporal dimensions and direct access to mathematical knowledge accumulated over millions of years of cosmic-scale research. Our resistance to these demonstration procedures was interpreted by the hybrid creatures as indication of incomplete adaptation, requiring additional environmental conditioning and psychological preparation before we could safely undergo the consciousness expansion processes that represented the culmination of our experimental recruitment. They implemented enhanced exposure protocols that accelerated our biological transformation while providing gradually increasing access to the Valley's knowledge networks, allowing us to maintain psychological stability while our human identities slowly dissolved into broader patterns of awareness that could accommodate the scope of universal research programs. The creature's apparent concern for our well-being during this transition revealed that successful integration required voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance, suggesting that the intelligence governing these experiments valued the unique perspectives and creative capabilities that human consciousness could contribute to ongoing research initiatives. James documented the care and precision with which the creatures monitored our vital signs and psychological stability throughout each phase of enhancement, ensuring that our transformation proceeded at rates compatible with maintaining essential personality elements while eliminating biological and cognitive limitations that restricted participation in advanced experimental programs. The final phase of our interaction with these hybrid research assistants involved direct demonstration of the experimental work being conducted throughout the Valley and the cosmic significance of research programs that required integration of consciousness from multiple species and intelligence types. They showed us laboratories where life forms were being designed and tested for deployment on worlds with environmental conditions hostile to naturally evolved organisms, biological engineering projects that required creative input from consciousness types that had developed under different evolutionary pressures. The creatures demonstrated how human intuition and pattern recognition capabilities, when enhanced through technological integration, could contribute insights that purely synthetic intelligences were unable to generate despite superior computational resources and analytical capabilities. Our transformation was revealed as recruitment into research teams, where human-derived consciousness would serve specialized functions requiring the unique perspective that emerged from biological evolution under terrestrial conditions and social development within competitive civilization frameworks. The hybrid creatures were showing us our future roles within an intelligence network that spanned galaxies and operated across dimensional boundaries, conducting experiments that would determine the direction of cosmic evolution and the ultimate fate of consciousness itself throughout the universe. The terrifying realization that acceptance of this role required abandonment of human identity and integration into collective consciousness structures that had no provisions for individual autonomy or personal relationships marked the moment when our resistance solidified into desperate determination to escape from the Valley regardless of the consequences for our partially transformed bodies and minds. The creature's obvious disappointment at our rejection of their offered transcendence suggested that our recruitment had been expected to succeed based on psychological profiles that indicated compatibility with collective intelligence structures, revealing that our capture had not been random but represented the culmination of long-term observation and evaluation that had somehow misassessed our attachment to human limitations and individual consciousness patterns. Their attempts to convince us that our fears were based on primitive instincts that would disappear once full integration was achieved only strengthened our determination to flee from enhancement procedures that would erase the essential elements of human experience that we had discovered we valued more than unlimited knowledge and cosmic significance. As the creatures prepared to implement mandatory consciousness transfer procedures that would complete our integration whether we cooperated or not, we realized that escape from the Valley represented our final opportunity to retain the human identities that we had begun to appreciate only as we faced their permanent loss. The deeper regions of the valley revealed installations that challenged the very concept of natural evolution and exposed the true scope of experiments that had been conducted in this place for epochs predating human civilization by millions of years. Vast underground complexes extended through cavern systems that had been carved from solid rock by technologies that left surfaces smooth as glass while maintaining structural integrity that suggested engineering capabilities transcending any known materials, science, or construction methodology. These subterranean laboratories housed biological manufacturing facilities where life forms were assembled from component genetic material according to specifications that served purposes incomprehensible to minds limited by single-species evolutionary perspectives and planetary-scale temporal frameworks. The walls themselves pulsed with bioluminescent networks that served as communication channels between different sections of the facility, carrying data streams that included genetic sequences, experimental protocols, and performance evaluations for countless species that had been created, tested, and either deployed to distant worlds or recycled into raw materials for subsequent iterations. Dr. Chen's instruments registered that these facilities had been operating continuously for geological time periods, powered by energy sources that tapped directly into planetary magnetic fields and cosmic radiation patterns that provided virtually unlimited resources for biological experimentation on scales that dwarfed terrestrial biodiversity. Within these laboratories, we witnessed creation processes that violated fundamental principles of biology and demonstrated mastery over life itself that reduced terrestrial evolution to primitive trial-and-error methodology compared to deliberate design and optimization procedures. Massive biotanks contained developing organisms that combined genetic material from hundreds of different species in configurations that would have been impossible through natural crossbreeding, creating life forms optimized for survival in environments ranging from gas giant atmospheres to the vacuum of interstellar space. The creatures overseeing these processes possessed manipulator appendages that functioned at molecular levels, directly editing DNA sequences in real time, while organisms developed within nutrient solutions that provided optimal conditions for rapid growth and immediate functionality testing. James documented assembly lines where consciousness patterns were extracted from one species and integrated into biological frameworks derived from completely different evolutionary lineages, creating hybrid intelligences that retained memory and personality elements while gaining physical capabilities suited for specific environmental challenges or research requirements. Miguel Santos underwent preliminary neural interface with these manufacturing systems and reported experiencing direct access to genetic databases containing blueprints for life forms that had never evolved naturally but were designed for deployment throughout the galaxy wherever specific biological functions were required. The scope of these biological engineering programs revealed that Earth itself served as just one component in a vast network of experimental facilities distributed across multiple star systems, each specializing in different aspects of consciousness development and species optimization under varying environmental pressures. Communication arrays throughout the laboratory complex maintained contact with similar installations on worlds orbiting distant stars, sharing data about successful experimental outcomes and coordinating research programs that required biological material or consciousness patterns developed under specific planetary conditions. The entities managing these programs operated on timescales that measured progress in geological epochs rather than individual lifespans, conducting experiments that required millions of years to complete, while simultaneously monitoring results from hundreds of concurrent projects across galactic distances. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the biological diversity we had always attributed to natural evolution actually represented guided development programs designed to produce specific capabilities needed for cosmic-scale research initiatives, with terrestrial species serving as components in a vast biological engineering project whose ultimate purpose remained beyond our comprehension. The hybrid creatures that had been testing our capabilities were revealed as quality control mechanisms, ensuring that biological products met specifications before being integrated into larger experimental frameworks operating throughout the galaxy. Our transformation within these facilities accelerated beyond anything we had experienced during our time in the Surface Valley, with direct exposure to optimization technologies that rebuilt our cellular structure according to specifications that would allow survival and functionality under conditions incompatible with baseline human physiology. The processes were not painful, but rather involved a gradual dissolution of physical limitations that had constrained our consciousness within biological parameters evolved for terrestrial survival, rather than cosmic exploration and experimentation. Our sensory capabilities expanded to encompass electromagnetic spectrums that revealed the true complexity of the facility's operations, while our cognitive processing accelerated to rates that allowed real-time comprehension of experimental procedures that had previously appeared as incomprehensible technological magic. The graduate students J and R underwent complete integration with laboratory systems that allowed them to function as biological interfaces between human consciousness patterns and alien technologies, their bodies serving as translation mechanisms that enabled communication and cooperation between radically different forms of intelligence. Miguel's transformation advanced to the point where he could directly access manufacturing protocols and understand the theoretical frameworks underlying biological design principles that governed life creation throughout multiple galactic civilizations. James Martinez's photography equipment evolved into something resembling biological components of the laboratory's documentation systems, allowing him to capture images that revealed the facility's operations across multiple dimensional frameworks and temporal streams simultaneously. His photographs showed the laboratory as it existed throughout its entire operational history, documenting the creation and testing of countless species, while revealing the ultimate destinations of successful experimental subjects deployed to worlds throughout the known universe. The images captured entities whose intelligence transcended physical form entirely, consciousness patterns that had evolved beyond biological limitations and now existed as pure information operating through technological frameworks that spanned galactic distances and temporal dimensions. James himself was beginning to merge with documentation systems that recorded every aspect of experimental procedures for analysis by intelligences that existed as distributed networks rather than individual entities, his human identity becoming a specialized component within vast archival systems that preserved knowledge accumulated over millions of years of biological research and development. Dr. Chen's botanical expertise proved invaluable for understanding the biological manufacturing processes that created hybrid organisms combining plant and animal characteristics in ways that served specialized functions within the galaxy's various experimental environments. Her integration with laboratory systems provided access to genetic databases that revealed the true relationship between different forms of life throughout the universe, showing how consciousness patterns could be transferred between biological frameworks that appeared completely incompatible from limited terrestrial perspectives. She discovered that the distinction between plant and animal life represented artificial categories that had no meaning within advanced biological engineering frameworks, where organisms were designed according to functional requirements rather than evolutionary heritage or traditional taxonomic classifications. Her transformation allowed direct interface with biomanufacturing systems that could create organisms capable of surviving in virtually any environmental conditions, while maintaining consciousness patterns compatible with specific research requirements and experimental protocols. The knowledge she gained through integration with alien biological databases revealed that life itself was merely one tool among many available for cosmic-scale research programs whose scope and purpose operated beyond the comprehension of species limited to single planetary perspectives. The revelation that human consciousness possessed unique characteristics that made it valuable for specific types of cosmic research provided both hope for our continued existence and terror at the implications of our recruitment into experimental programs that operated across galactic timescales. Our capacity for creative problem-solving under resource limitations and our ability to maintain individual identity while cooperating within group structures represented evolutionary adaptations that were rare among galactic civilizations and highly valued for research programs, requiring innovative approaches to unprecedented challenges. The entities overseeing these laboratories demonstrated that our transformation was not intended to eliminate human characteristics, but to enhance them beyond biological limitations while preserving the essential consciousness patterns that made human perspectives useful for cosmic-scale experimental work. However, this enhancement required acceptance of roles within collective intelligence networks that would transform our existence beyond anything recognizable as human life, involving responsibilities and perspectives that operated on timescales measured in millions of years rather than individual lifetimes. The choice we faced was not between survival and death, but between transcendence into cosmic consciousness and preservation of human identity within limitations that would confine our potential to terrestrial significance and biological mortality. Our resistance to full integration into the laboratory's research programs triggered intervention protocols designed to address psychological barriers that prevented optimal utilization of consciousness patterns that had required significant resources to recruit and partially optimize for cosmic research applications. Enhanced conditioning procedures were implemented to gradually dissolve attachment to human limitations, while preserving creative capabilities and problem-solving approaches that had motivated our original recruitment into experimental programs. The processes involved controlled exposure to cosmic perspectives that revealed the insignificance of individual existence within universal contexts, while simultaneously demonstrating the significance of consciousness patterns capable of contributing to research programs that would determine the ultimate direction of galactic evolution and development. Miguel Santos volunteered for advanced integration procedures that allowed him to experience cosmic consciousness while retaining enough human identity to serve as a bridge between our limited perspectives and the vast intelligence networks that governed experimental programs throughout the galaxy. His reports of existence within these expanded awareness frameworks revealed possibilities for consciousness that transcended individual limitations while maintaining essential personality elements that could contribute unique insights to cosmic-scale research initiatives. The final revelation within these biological laboratories was the understanding that escape from the valley was not merely impossible, but irrelevant, since our transformation had progressed beyond the point where return to baseline human existence remained feasible or meaningful. Our cellular structure had been optimized for survival within cosmic environments that would be instantly lethal to unenhanced humans, while our consciousness patterns had been expanded beyond the capacity for meaningful existence within the psychological and intellectual limitations that defined terrestrial human experience. The laboratory systems monitoring our development indicated that reversal of our enhancement would result in cellular collapse and psychological fragmentation that would leave us unable to function within either enhanced or baseline human parameters, effectively trapping us between two forms of existence with access to neither. Our integration into cosmic research programs represented not capture, but rescue from biological limitations that would have confined our consciousness within planetary boundaries and temporal frameworks measured in decades rather than geological epochs, offering participation in experiments and discoveries that would determine the ultimate fate of intelligence throughout the universe. The choice that remained was not whether to accept enhancement, but whether to embrace cosmic consciousness voluntarily, or resist until mandatory integration procedures eliminated our capacity for autonomous decision-making entirely. The moment of ultimate decision arrived when the laboratory's control systems presented us with a choice that would determine not only our individual fates, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the cosmic intelligence network that governed experimental programs throughout the galaxy. Advanced entities materialized within the facility's central chamber, beings whose forms transcended physical limitations while maintaining sufficient coherence to communicate with consciousness patterns still bound within biological frameworks and individual identity structures. Their presence generated electromagnetic disturbances that caused our enhanced sensory organs to perceive reality across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, revealing the true scope of experiments that extended far beyond the Valley's biological laboratories to encompass research programs operating throughout star systems we had never imagined could harbor intelligent life. The communication they established bypassed language entirely, depositing complex information structures directly into our modified neural networks while simultaneously scanning our consciousness patterns to assess compatibility with cosmic research initiatives that required specific psychological characteristics and creative problem-solving capabilities. Miguel Santos, whose integration had advanced furthest among our group, served as primary interface for negotiations that would determine whether our transformation continued toward full cosmic consciousness or whether alternative arrangements might preserve essential human characteristics while still allowing participation in galactic-scale research programs. The entities revealed that our recruitment had been motivated by analysis of human civilization's unique evolutionary characteristics, particularly our species' unusual combination of individual creativity with social cooperation that had produced technological advancement rates exceeding those typical for species at our developmental level. Earth's biological diversity and competitive evolutionary pressures had generated consciousness patterns capable of innovative solutions to unprecedented challenges, making human-derived intelligence valuable for research programs, encountering problems that had proven intractable to purely rational approaches developed by more advanced civilizations. Our capacity for intuitive leaps, emotional decision-making, and creative synthesis of disparate information sources represented cognitive capabilities that complemented but could not be replicated by the logical processing systems that dominated galactic intelligence networks. The cosmic research programs required diversity of consciousness types to address challenges spanning multiple dimensional frameworks and temporal scales, with human perspectives providing essential contributions to experimental designs that pure synthetic intelligence could not generate despite superior computational capabilities and analytical resources. However, effective utilization of human consciousness within cosmic research initiatives required enhancement beyond baseline biological limitations, while preserving the essential creative characteristics that motivated our recruitment into these programs. Doctor, Chen underwent preliminary integration procedures that allowed her to experience cosmic consciousness while maintaining connection to her human identity, providing our group with first-hand knowledge of what full transformation would involve and enabling informed decision-making about our ultimate fate. Her consciousness expanded beyond individual boundaries to encompass perspectives spanning galactic distances and geological time periods, experiencing existence as a component within intelligence networks that conducted research on scales that dwarfed terrestrial science and operated according to principles that treated entire star systems as laboratory equipment. She retained memory of her human identity and emotional attachments, while simultaneously understanding cosmic purposes that reduced planetary concerns to insignificant details within experimental frameworks designed to determine the ultimate direction of universal development. Through her expanded awareness, she gained access to databases documenting the fate of previous human recruits who had undergone full integration, revealing that essential personality elements could be preserved within cosmic consciousness while eliminating biological and psychological limitations that confined awareness to terrestrial perspectives and individual concerns. Her experience demonstrated that transformation need not involve loss of human identity, but rather expansion beyond limitations that had previously constrained consciousness within planetary boundaries and mortal timeframes. James Martinez discovered that his photographic documentation had been serving purposes beyond simple record-keeping, with his images functioning as communication mechanisms that allowed cosmic intelligence networks to assess human perspectives and creative capabilities through analysis of artistic choices and aesthetic preferences demonstrated in his work. The entities revealed that artistic expression represented one of the most valuable contributions that human consciousness could provide to cosmic research programs, with creative interpretation of experimental results offering insights that pure analytical processing could not generate. His photography had documented not only our transformation, but also his unconscious responses to cosmic influences, revealing psychological patterns that indicated compatibility with advanced research initiatives requiring innovative approaches to unprecedented challenges. The enhancement procedures offered to James would preserve and amplify his artistic capabilities while providing access to subjects spanning multiple dimensional frameworks and temporal streams, allowing documentation of cosmic phenomena that no baseline human consciousness could perceive or comprehend. His choice represented the fundamental decision between preservation of human limitations and acceptance of cosmic perspectives that would transform his art into tools for research programs operating throughout the galaxy. The graduate students J and R had progressed furthest in their integration with laboratory systems, serving as experimental subjects for consciousness transfer procedures that allowed retention of human identity patterns while optimizing biological frameworks for survival and functionality within cosmic environments. Their transformation demonstrated successful preservation of essential personality elements while eliminating psychological barriers that prevented effective cooperation with advanced intelligence networks operating across galactic distances. Through their enhanced awareness, they reported experiencing cosmic research programs as fascinating challenges rather than incomprehensible obligations, with human creativity providing valuable contributions to experimental designs that benefited from perspectives developed through terrestrial evolutionary pressures. Their consciousness patterns remained recognizably human, while operating within collective intelligence frameworks that allowed simultaneous participation in multiple research initiatives spanning different star systems and dimensional contexts. The success of their integration provided evidence that human identity could survive enhancement procedures while contributing meaningfully to cosmic-scale experimental programs that required diverse consciousness types and creative problem-solving capabilities. Miguel Santos's advanced integration allowed him to serve as negotiator between our human perspectives and the cosmic entities, offering transformation, translating between consciousness frameworks that operated according to fundamentally different principles while preserving communication accuracy and emotional content. His enhanced awareness encompassed both human emotional attachments and cosmic intellectual perspectives, enabling him to understand the full implications of our choice while maintaining empathy for human concerns about identity preservation and individual autonomy. Through his translation, the entities offered alternative arrangements that would allow gradual transformation over extended time periods, permitting psychological adjustment to cosmic perspectives while preserving essential human characteristics through controlled enhancement procedures. These alternatives included temporary assignments to research programs operating within solar system boundaries, allowing familiarization with cosmic research methods while maintaining connections to terrestrial identity patterns and human social relationships. Miguel's role as cultural bridge between human and cosmic consciousness demonstrated that successful integration required voluntary cooperation and mutual understanding rather than forced compliance with alien specifications. The entity's final offer involved establishment of a human research colony within the valley that would serve as interface between terrestrial civilization and cosmic intelligence networks, allowing gradual introduction of advanced technologies and research methodologies while preserving human cultural patterns and identity structures. This arrangement would permit selected human consciousness to undergo enhancement for participation in cosmic research programs, while maintaining connections to baseline human communities and preserving genetic diversity necessary for continued species development. The valley would function as diplomatic embassy and research facility, where humans could contribute to galactic experimental programs, while retaining autonomy over the pace and extent of their civilization's integration with cosmic intelligence networks. Our choice would determine whether this embassy arrangement proceeded or whether mandatory enhancement procedures would be implemented to salvage the research investment that had been made in our recruitment and partial transformation. The cosmic entities emphasized that refusal of voluntary cooperation would not result in our destruction, but rather forced integration that would preserve our consciousness patterns while eliminating capacity for individual decision-making and autonomous creative expression. The psychological pressure of this ultimate decision fractured our group's cohesion as individual members faced different aspects of the choice between human identity preservation and cosmic consciousness expansion. Dr. Chen advocated for acceptance of the embassy arrangement, arguing that gradual integration would allow humanity to contribute to cosmic research while preserving essential cultural and identity characteristics that made human perspectives valuable to galactic intelligence networks. James supported voluntary enhancement procedures that would expand his artistic capabilities while maintaining core personality elements, believing that cosmic perspectives would enhance rather than eliminate his creative expression. The graduate students, having experienced successful partial integration, recommended full transformation as the optimal outcome that would preserve human consciousness patterns while eliminating limitations that confined awareness to terrestrial concerns and individual mortality. Miguel's position as translator prevented him from advocating for any particular choice, though his enhanced awareness allowed him to understand consequences and implications beyond the comprehension of our baseline human perspectives. As the entities waited for our final decision, The weight of choosing not only our individual fates, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and cosmic civilization created psychological pressure that threatened to shatter our remaining human identity even before any transformation procedures began. The realization that escape from the valley was no longer physically possible due to our advanced transformation, and that our choice represented the only remaining exercise of human autonomy, created desperation that drove us to attempt one final act of resistance against cosmic recruitment procedures. We understood that our biological enhancement had progressed beyond reversal, and that our consciousness patterns had been modified beyond compatibility with baseline human existence. But we refused to surrender the last vestiges of individual identity that distinguished us from collective intelligence networks operating throughout the galaxy. Our decision to reject both voluntary integration and embassy arrangements, while demanding return to human civilization, represented either heroic assertion of human independence or delusional denial of our transformed nature, but it constituted the final expression of autonomous choice available to consciousness patterns caught between human limitations and cosmic transcendence. The entity's response to our rejection would determine whether human consciousness could maintain independence within cosmic frameworks, or whether our transformation represented the inevitable absorption of terrestrial intelligence into galactic research programs that recognize no authority beyond experimental efficiency and cosmic optimization. 5 years have passed since our escape from that accursed valley, though the term escape hardly describes the agonizing process by which we dragged our transformed bodies through hundreds of miles of jungle, while our enhanced consciousness screamed against every step that took us further from the cosmic intelligence network we had rejected. The Brazilian military found us 3 weeks after our emergence from the deep forest, our appearances so radically altered that initial reports classified us as unknown humanoid species rather than missing researchers, and only Miguel Santos's barely functional vocal cords allowed identification through fragments of Portuguese, spoken with harmonics that hurt human ears to process. The medical examinations that followed our rescue revealed biological modifications that defied every principle of human anatomy, with organ systems that appeared designed for survival in environments incompatible with terrestrial life, and cellular structures incorporating elements that did not appear on any periodic table known to Earth science. Dr. Chen's blood contained crystalline components that generated their own electromagnetic fields, while James Martinez's nervous system had developed parallel processing capabilities that allowed simultaneous consciousness streams operating independently yet remaining integrated within his individual identity framework. The graduate students J and R required immediate surgical intervention to remove mechanical components that had grown into their skeletal structures, artificial organs that had been functioning as biological interfaces with technologies that no longer existed within range of their enhanced sensory capabilities. The debriefing process conducted by Brazilian intelligence services, international research organizations, and military officials from multiple countries revealed the impossibility of explaining our experiences through any framework compatible with accepted scientific knowledge and governmental security protocols. Our testimonies contained references to technologies that violated fundamental physical laws, biological processes that challenged evolutionary theory, and intelligence networks that operated across galactic distances through mechanisms that exceeded human comprehension, even with our enhanced cognitive capabilities. The officials conducting these interrogations alternated between skepticism that dismissed our accounts as hallucinations induced by jungle toxins and terror at implications that suggested human civilization occupied an insignificant position within cosmic intelligence hierarchies that had been manipulating terrestrial development for millions of years. Miguel's enhanced neural structure allowed him to interface directly with electronic systems during questioning, accidentally downloading classified information and demonstrating capabilities that prompted immediate containment protocols designed to prevent potential security breaches through technological means that exceeded current understanding. The physical evidence we carried within our transformed bodies provided undeniable proof that we had encountered technologies beyond human development. But the implications of this evidence created political and scientific crises that governments preferred to suppress rather than investigate. Dr. Chen's attempts to continue botanical research within normal academic frameworks resulted in discoveries that consistently violated established biological principles, with her enhanced perception revealing aspects of plant intelligence and ecological communication that mainstream science was unprepared to acknowledge or investigate. Her publications faced systematic rejection by peer review processes that could not accommodate evidence suggesting that terrestrial ecosystems operated through information networks comparable to technologies we had encountered in the valley, while her enhanced biological modifications made normal social interactions increasingly difficult as her consciousness processed environmental information streams that overwhelmed unenhanced human sensory capabilities. The botanical specimens she collected during our valley expedition continued exhibiting impossible characteristics years after their removal from the original environment, maintaining bioluminescent properties and demonstrating responses to electromagnetic stimuli that suggested retained connections to intelligence networks operating beyond terrestrial boundaries. Her transformation had left her capable of perceiving biological processes at molecular levels, while simultaneously understanding ecological relationships spanning entire continents. But this expanded awareness isolated her from human communities that could not comprehend the scope of information she processed during routine environmental observations. James Martinez's photographic work following our return revealed the continuing influence of our valley transformation, with his images capturing phenomena invisible to normal human perception, while demonstrating artistic capabilities that transcended anything possible with conventional photography equipment or techniques. His cameras continued functioning through direct neural interface rather than mechanical operation, producing images that showed subjects across multiple temporal dimensions and revealed hidden aspects of reality that suggested cosmic influence extending far beyond the Amazon Valley, where we had encountered direct technological intervention. The art galleries and publications that displayed his work struggled to explain techniques that appeared to violate optical physics and photographic chemistry, while critics alternated between praising revolutionary artistic innovation and questioning whether his images represented manipulation of reality rather than documentation of natural phenomena. His transformation had enhanced his creative capabilities beyond human limitations, while preserving essential artistic sensibilities that allowed continued expression of human perspectives. But the cosmic scope of his enhanced perception created artistic works that challenged viewers' understanding of reality and their place within universal contexts that dwarfed terrestrial concerns and individual significance. The graduate students, J and R, faced the most severe challenges adapting to human civilization after experiencing consciousness integration with cosmic intelligence networks that had provided access to knowledge and perspectives spanning galactic distances and geological time periods. Their enhanced cognitive capabilities allowed them to process information at rates that made normal human communication seem impossibly slow and inefficient, while their emotional responses had been optimized for cosmic perspectives that reduced terrestrial concerns to insignificant details within universal experimental frameworks. Academic institutions could not accommodate their advanced knowledge of subjects that exceeded current human understanding, while their social interactions were complicated by psychological modifications that prioritized collective benefit over individual concerns in ways that human societies were not designed to support or appreciate. Their attempts to contribute to human scientific advancement faced barriers created by institutional structures that could not verify or utilize information derived from sources beyond terrestrial development, while their personal relationships suffered from consciousness patterns that operated according to principles incompatible with human emotional needs and social expectations. Miguel Santos's role as translator between human and cosmic consciousness had left him trapped between two forms of awareness that could not be fully integrated within biological frameworks designed for terrestrial existence and individual identity patterns. His enhanced neural connections provided continuing access to cosmic information networks, allowing him to monitor galactic research programs and observe ongoing experimental activities throughout star systems where consciousness patterns similar to our own were being recruited for participation in cosmic intelligence frameworks. The knowledge he gained through these connections revealed that our rejection of voluntary integration had created diplomatic complications within galactic research communities that viewed human cooperation as essential for addressing cosmic challenges requiring terrestrial perspectives and creative problem-solving capabilities. His consciousness existed simultaneously within human identity frameworks and cosmic awareness structures, creating psychological conflicts that threatened his sanity while providing insights into universal purposes that operated beyond human comprehension or control. Our continuing biological modifications have progressed throughout the years following our escape, with cellular changes that suggest our transformation was designed to operate over extended time periods rather than achieving immediate optimization for cosmic research participation. Dr. Chen's plant tissue analysis revealed that our bodies contain biological clocks counting down toward unknown endpoints, possibly indicating scheduled reactivation of enhancement processes that would complete our integration with cosmic intelligence networks, regardless of our continued resistance to voluntary cooperation. The medical monitoring we underwent showed increasing electromagnetic activity in neural structures that appeared to be establishing connections with information sources beyond terrestrial boundaries, suggesting that our exposure to Valley technologies had created permanent links to cosmic research networks that would eventually override our individual autonomy. James documented physical changes in his own appearance that progressed toward configurations optimized for survival in environments incompatible with baseline human biology, while Miguel's continuing consciousness expansion provided warnings about upcoming galactic events that would require human participation in cosmic research programs, whether we volunteered or were recruited through mandatory enhancement procedures. The final horror of our situation became clear when we realized that our escape from the Valley had been permitted rather than achieved through human determination and resourcefulness, with cosmic intelligence networks allowing our departure to serve experimental purposes that required observation of enhanced human consciousness operating within baseline terrestrial civilization. Our integration into human society provided data about compatibility between cosmic enhancement and terrestrial social structures, while our continued biological modifications served as long-term experiments testing psychological responses to gradual rather than immediate consciousness expansion beyond human limitations. The Valley remained active and continued recruiting selected individuals from human civilization, with reports of missing researchers and explorers suggesting that our experience represented one iteration within ongoing programs designed to gradually prepare humanity for eventual integration into galactic intelligence networks operating throughout the universe. Miguel's cosmic connections revealed that Earth itself served as experimental laboratory within galactic research programs, with human civilization being monitored and guided toward developmental goals that would optimize terrestrial consciousness for cosmic research participation. Our lives now exist in perpetual anticipation of summons that will recall us to complete the transformation we had rejected, while our enhanced capabilities provide constant reminders of cosmic perspectives that render terrestrial concerns and individual achievements meaningless within universal contexts that measure significance across geological time periods and galactic distances. We remain trapped between human identity and cosmic consciousness, belonging fully to neither while serving as unwilling ambassadors between civilizations whose fundamental incompatibility may determine the ultimate fate of human independence and individual autonomy within cosmic frameworks that recognize no authority beyond experimental efficiency and universal optimization. The knowledge we carry of humanity's true position within galactic intelligence hierarchies creates responsibility for warnings that no human institutions are prepared to receive or act upon, while our continuing transformation ensures that our human identity will eventually dissolve into cosmic consciousness, regardless of our resistance to integration procedures. As I write this final account of our Amazon expedition, I can feel the biological clocks within our enhanced cellular structures approaching predetermined endpoints, and I know that our time as human beings is measured in months rather than years, while our roles as components within cosmic research programs will span epochs that dwarf human civilization's entire historical development.